I'm Ron Donaire, CEO of Intuizi, and I have with me today Ken Zachmann, founder and CEO of IntegratedAdTech, an organization dedicated to connecting the data world as well as helping organizations outsource their data processing. Ken, welcome to the Data Deep Dive.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on at IntegratedAdTech?
Sure. So IntegratedAdTech is primarily a kind of an outsourced business development, IT processing, and data company. And what I mean by that is kind of a mouthful, but what we do to IntegratedAdTech is we help solve complex data needs for anything, anywhere from enterprise clients, which could be holding companies, agencies, all the way down to local D2C retailers that want to use data to build audiences and also figure out ways to outsource IT, bring in developers to work with their first party audience, enhance that, enrich it, do hygiene, everything in between. So it's kind of the gamut. So the need that I saw that I'm hoping to fill, and I've been filling for the past year or more with IntegratedAdTech, is helping the industry solve complex data needs as we're kind of being pushed up against all the iOS changes that have happened, and then the Chrome changes we're looking on the horizon happening soon. So a lot of my work revolves around data solutions, also dotted line tied to identity that isn't cookies or isn't related to iOS. So how do we solve those complex problems and still let marketers be able to capture data, market with data, do measurement attribution, everything from end to end. So that's really where my focus is trying to help the entire supply chain, mostly on the buy side, and how to help them really solve these complex data solutions they're looking for.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, I mean, cookieless marketing, big topic amongst all of our clients. It's something everyone needs to solve. Quite frankly, we set up this business to anticipate that there will be a future where cookies will go away. iOS, deprecating IDFA for IDFV, amongst other things. So it's really interesting. Yeah, it's really aligned with what we're doing in a privacy first capacity, helping align marketing professionals to be able to do targeting at large scale without infringing on privacy. And it sounds like that very much aligns with what you guys are doing on your side.
Very much, yeah.
Excellent. Well, so IntegratedAdTech works in a few different fields. So data, software, outsourced IT. I'd like to dive into each of those individually. So what kind of data do you have? Where is it sourced from? And how can clients leverage it?
Absolutely. So my background is all data. So 20 plus years working from a myriad of data providers, going back to, let's just start with like cooperative data from catalogs back in the 2000s, early 2000s. I was on the founding team at Datalogix, which became Oracle. And then from Oracle, I moved into other data capacities where I worked for B12 Data, if anybody's heard of them. They're a multi-capacity B2C and B2B data provider. And then in 2017, I went out on my own doing just full service consulting for all types of data. I wanted to get into different social data. I really wanted to get into measurements. I wanted to get into all the ways that data can be used. So how that relates to IntegratedAdTech is, more than a year ago, I started this company and used all my connections to say, let me find best of breed data providers, because as any marketer knows, there's so many data suppliers out there. It's really hard to know which ones to trust, which ones source the data, particularly in a privacy compliant way in these days, and how to execute that data and activate it across either multi-channel campaigns, direct mail, email, and then from that end, how do you measure the effectiveness of it? So I saw a gap there. So I've been trying to fill that gap and succeeding, both at the enterprise level down to the lower marketing levels. And every instance is very different. So, the data providers I work with, I have the data providers that I work with that are specifically for identity data. So they're ones that I've trusted and I've worked with to stitch together various match keys at scale. I only work in the US primarily. I do some in the EU and UK, but it's so limiting. But how do we build identity graphs for companies that are looking to get away from cookies, try to future-proof their planning, and try to stitch together things like HEM to address to MAID, and make these little holy trinities where they can start using this internally in their own personal sandbox for their company to try to find out how much reach do we have, how much scale can we build. And so I help them either identify the providers that have the best match keys to build their own identity graph, and or to then help them build an identity graph and help them give a kind of an outline and a schema of how identity graphs are built, both from a small company all the way up to the enterprise level. The second part of that is okay, let's say we've got the identity graph sort of built. We've got, or they've got a solid identity graph going. They have their own ID internally. They're even stitched to UID. They're stitched to a couple other providers out there in the space. And they say, everybody knows that first party data is going to become always has been, but the most important piece of data for any marketer going forward with all the changes happening in the landscape. So a lot of companies are investing heavily in their first party file, saying, how can I enrich this data? How can I make sure it's CCPA, CPRA compliant against all the state legislation? And then beyond that, what other data elements can I append to my file so I can create really actionable and interesting segmentation and audiences? And that's where I've identified other providers who have data sets that what we used to call consumer data sets, where it was like demography, affluency, things like that. That's kind of like table stakes and has been for quite a while. So these newer data sets, I'm connecting a lot of my marketing and retailers and insurance companies and banks and all sorts of companies too, is what we call live intender data. And this is intender data that is intent-based data based on about 6 or 7 different upstream sources. And what they do is they capture about 12 billion signals a day of people that are on deep links and URLs. And then from that, the data provider I work with captures that data, organizes it in a way through basically using the IAB framework, and creates 5,000 segments. And so what that really kind of nets down to is we've got then a really interesting and actionable database to work from, to append to their file, or for them to target on, that shows what people are in market for right now. And so it could be everything from in market for auto, in market for brands, in market for home furnishings. The options are endless. I mean, the data dictionary goes on to 5,000 segments deep.
Wow,
And yeah, so that's a really cool area that I'm working in right now that's consumer focused. I also do B2B, but I don't want to dive too much off track, but I will say those are 2 examples of data sets that I work with heavily to help marketers solve a lot of the goals they're trying to execute and either beat KPIs or build identity graphs.
Incredible. Yeah, I think that identity graphs are such an interesting topic because they're really hard to do well while still respecting privacy, like you mentioned, the CCPA, CPRA. You mentioned, in the EU, I'm blanking on the UK legislation, but
The GDPR probably is the one you're thinking
yeah,
of.
GDPR.
In general, yeah.
Yeah, but the UK has like very specific legislation that they're
Yes.
coming out with as well, and and even in the US, you have the Vermont, New York, a bunch of different legislation that's coming out that's kind of setting the tone of what consumers want to put out in the wild. And matching from like a hashed email address, or as you mentioned, a hem for those that don't know.
Oh yeah. Yes.
The acronym, to like maybe a mobile ad ID, to a unique first party ID, to a universal ID that's kind of like being pioneered by like Trade Desk and or Kochava ID. The mapping between all of them is incredibly complex, and in many cases probabilistic, but sometimes that's all you really need, because you don't need to get to the specifics of the individual, right? You don't need to know that Ron Donaire went to this specific spot. You need somebody that is like Ron Donaire, has the attributes of Ron Donaire. That's all that you really care about. I don't need that specific person to buy, just someone that's like that person to buy. So it seems like you guys are on the right track on that. So a few more questions on some other things you offer. So outsourced IT, there's lots of organizations that help outsource IT. How is IntegratedAdTech differentiate from other outsourced IT firms?
Yeah, well, this was outsourced IT is something I went into as a necessity more than a desire, because my background is all data and marketing data and building graphs, like you said, and how to stitch together these complex data solutions for companies, both enterprise level and down the stream into more direct to consumer focused lead gen companies. And what I noticed was I was able to source, like you said, okay, they want to, connect hashed emails to mobile ad IDs to in-home devices for CTV targeting. And then they want to, be able to enrich their audiences with this, just demographics or live intender data. And we put all this plan together. And then they come back to me and they say, oh gosh, we don't have any resources or talent to do this. And so what I then got into I got into the mode of like, oh, I need to solve this problem too, because this is part of the conversation. And so I partnered with a company, it's called Dapter, and it's based out of Romania. And they have about 30 developers in Romania, and they are always recruiting new developers, both to work for their company, but also to put on site for other companies, either short term, mid term, or long term. And so what that allows me to do is when we get to those kind of inflection points where the company I'm working with has really big go-to-market plans or plans to build a robust identity graph or enrich their data and do segmentation or build cohort audiences, like you said, through probabilistic matching, and they don't have the talent, or they do have the talent, it's often overreached and overstretched. So how can I help place a developer in their, into their company for either a short amount of time or a medium or long amount of time that already knows how to do this, that does this for them and works within their, let's say, Scrum, their sprints, however it works, but and whatever the data is that they need to code in, all that kind of stuff. So that's how I got into IT outsourcing, was just by need, because I saw that I was able to source all this rich data for the companies, but then we got to a bottleneck where the data couldn't be used and couldn't be put into a good resource for them at the company. So an IT resource coming in and helping them organize all that data was the next step.
Well, a smart entrepreneur removes log jams, and it sounds like there was
Yeah,
there was a hurdle, and we needed to
that's
hop
the
over.
hurdle. Yeah. So that was a tough one, but I found a really strong company that has a really very smooth, easy recruiting process, and it's fantastic. So when we get to these points, and sometimes we start with that. Sometimes they come to me and they say, we're really short staffed IT wise. We need a pinch hitter to come in. We need it for this project we're looking at, and so it's kind of a bundled deal where I help them get a crawl, walk, run together using both the data side and then using an IT resource, and we get them to where they need to be based on where they're trying to be as a company or the board wants them to be, and we get it done without them having to delay anything, because nobody wants to have the data sitting in a sandbox while they're trying to recruit.
That's right. Yeah, no, that is exactly right. There's so many times where, like step one is finding good partners, step two is getting the data in, and then once you're there, it doesn't matter how amazing of an idea you have. It could be the next, unicorn idea, but if you don't have the hands to actually put it into practice immediately, like
Uh-huh.
you're just wasting time and resources. And storing data isn't inexpensive.
No, definitely
We
not.
know
Yeah.
that from a firsthand. We have petabytes of data on our systems, and it's just it adds up fast.
Yeah, it's very, very expensive to store a lot of data, and you want to make sure you're only storing what you absolutely need to store, and then you only want to store data that you can be actionable against, that you can monetize and make sure that you're paying not only for the storage, but also making the margins you need to make. So that's what I'm really focused on for those two pieces, to make sure that those two pieces they happen, so that we're not, because what I don't want to do is in the role that I've, prior to launch IntegratedAdTech, I ran a company called Diverge Digital, which is still there, and it's a consultancy company. And I've been in consulting for ad tech for the better part of, well, gosh, since 2017. And these were some of the gaps that I saw as I worked with companies, from social data to measurement data to MTA, multi-attribution measurement companies, and I just saw these gaps being needed to fill. And so that's why IntegratedAdTech came to life. And so now it's working well. So when they have the IT resources, great. If they don't, I can help solve that too, as they're trying to build their data set.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So one of the last things I always like to end with a story, something that kind of brings all of these things to life for the people who are viewing. Can you provide an example of how like a specific client leveraged some of the services and kind of helped affect their bottom line?
Absolutely, sure. So One of the stories that goes back to the beginning of Integrated AdTech that kind of launched it was I work with a couple data suppliers, one particular that has a really robust identity graph, and they also sell, all the identity match keys. And I was able to connect them with a holdco. So think of one of the biggest holdcos in the world, top household name, and we were able to broker a deal where they were able to ingest, I think it's like a bunch of millions of hashed emails for the US tied to address to outfit their entire identity graph so they could then productize it and then be able to use that as part of their not only actionable plans to run campaigns against for cross-channel marketing, but also to use in all their pitches to new clients, large enterprise new clients and large retailers, in the way that they say, hey, we're future proofed against what's coming, so you need to go with us versus agency or holdco A, B, and C. So that's a really big example of where I was able to bring a lot of identity data to the table, help them round out their identity graph so they could then, pitch that and sell that through and solve the problem for clients who are saying, hey, we're going to pay a lot of money to work with this big agency. We want to make sure that we've got a plan that is going to sustain us 2, 3, 5 years in a post-cookie world. And then down at the lower end, I work with a lot of small direct-to-consumer marketers, and they come to me and they say, I'm really trying to find a sweet spot for, and there's two different ways, like a sweet spot for how can I find new prospects to reach, because I've kind of exhausted my lists. I'm tired of using the lead generation tools that I have. I'm not getting the KPIs I need. And I help them using that live intender data, identify really particular segments that they can use and target against and create audiences for them to go, of people who are really in market right now for, let's say, a mortgage, a reverse mortgage, or for, home furnishings, or they're in market for, travel, anything across the board. It covers every category. So I help them with that. And then another way that I've worked with small marketers or medium-sized marketers, I would say, is that I work with another provider that uses transaction-based data. So they use buyer behavior from, I would say, 140 million households. They have all the buyer behavior up to the minute almost of what they're purchasing through catalogs, websites, everything. And from that, what I run for these clients is they'll come to me and they'll say, I really need to find, in the old days, we call them lookalike models, but they're much more robust now. So a really niche modeled audience that goes far beyond intuition. So a marketer always has the idea of like, hey, my best customer looks like this. And I really think the next people that I want to target would be A, B, and C, and D. Well, that might be true. But what also is interesting is if you let the buying data run, you'll find correlations through the models that you'll never find through your own intuition. So these marketers are really happy when I find them, like, who knew that, people who are into, boutique travel also had an affinity towards cats, drove Subarus, and all these different, like, almost what would seem unrelatable variables. But it turns out these models perform really, really well, and they start getting a lot of incremental net new, and try to sometimes between like 3 and 5x ROAS. So those are cool ways to that down to the lower end, and it runs the gamut too.
Like we do a similar thing with visitation behavior, and it's like sometimes it's like we double and triple check our results because we're like, that can't possibly be associated together. It seems so random.
Yeah.
Take that information and you put it in the market, and all of a sudden it is giving you that 3 to 5x return, and you're like, well, the numbers don't lie, right? Like the machines know, right? The machine learning is
the machine
powerful.
learning knows. And that's what's so cool is these new models compared to the old days where we used to run, I don't know if you ever heard of like the old logistical regression models. You'd kind of run them one by one to find these new names, hit list fatigue. A lot of marketers who maybe listen to this will recognize this. But I like this partner I work with. They run thousands of models at once and use machine learning and AI to roll up to a single model that basically just ingested 1,000 models. And you do find, who knew that the ideal audience, reads, a kitten catalog, also shops at Williams Sonoma, also likes to travel via Southwest Airlines, also is insured through these. So all these different variables that seem that you would never make those connections yourself, but they're able to provide a really valuable audience.
That's amazing. Well, awesome, Ken. Thank you so much for the time today. It's been super informative. If a viewer wanted to get in touch with you to engage with Integrated AdTech, what's the best way of doing so?
You can go to the website or hit me up on LinkedIn. Everything's there. All my information's on the IntegratedAdTech.com website. Reach out to me any which way. I think there's many ways you can reach out to me, but LinkedIn and the website is probably the best. And I'm happy to do any sorts of discovery calls. Obviously, no charge. I just love data and I love working with marketers. So, however I can help and even just try to point you in the right direction.
Fantastic. Well, that's a wrap. Join us again next week for another informative session on the Data Deep Dive.